Hello, I'm Sarah Bearup-Neal, Gallery Manager with the Glen Arbor Arts Center. As part of the Glen Arbor Arts Center's exhibition Happy, I'm in conversation with University of Michigan professor Vic Strecher about his thinking and writing about the role purposeful living plays in human happiness. Vic's been a professor in the Department of Health, Behavior Health Education at the University of Michigan since 1995. And for the first 15 years, he focused on cancer prevention and control. Vic went on to create and develop a range of programs that bring together digital communications and human health, behavioral and neurosciences, AI, and other cutting-edge technologies to address mental and emotional health and well-being, for which he is the recipient of many awards and accolades. Vic's newest and latest focus is living on purpose. His books, Life on Purpose and the graphic novel On Purpose, are true to the old adage, write what you know. And here's something Vic knows. In 2010, Vic's daughter, 19-year-old Julia, died in her sleep, a death that was brought on by a rare heart condition. Julia's death threw a monumental spanner into Vic's life and the lives of his wife, Jerry, and their oldest daughter, Rachel. Vic, as I have been thinking about all this, many people following the death of a child might withdraw from the world and question, if not lose, their sense of purpose. You, however, after a period of intense mourning, were jolted back into action by a vision of Julia and her message to you. And I thought this was awfully teenager speak. Get over yourself.
Yeah, right.
I'd like you to give some context to this work that came out of that and our conversation today about purpose and happiness. So would you read from the opening of your book, Life on Purpose, on page 5?
Yeah, sure. But first, Sarah, hi, how are you?
I'm
Oh,
fine.
nice seeing you.
Vice versa.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And thanks for inviting me to this. Yeah, so I've got this book, and I will just read the first page and a quarter. This is the beginning of the book. June 20th, 2010, 5:15 a.m. In my kayak, a few miles from shore, paddling hard. Lake Michigan, smooth and ice cold, my kayak cutting through a thick, silky curtain of water off the bow. Still in boxers and t-shirt, hadn't thought about dressing for the chilly morning air. Wasn't really thinking. I'd been woken by a dream, climbed out of bed, and a minute later pushed off into the lake. Not very smart. Lake Michigan owns hundreds of ships and certainly its share of puny kayaks. I didn't really care. Maybe I'll paddle to Wisconsin, I thought. But the sun stopped my paddling as it broke over the horizon. I turned toward the east and sat still, perfectly quiet. Suddenly, a billion gold flecks of light surrounded me as the sun rose. In that moment, I felt the warmth and love of my daughter, Julia. Get over it, Dad, she was telling me. I almost tipped over. It was startling to hear her voice. She had died just a few months before. The crossroad of my life was right there, 2 miles off the shore of Lake Michigan. The signs were clear. One arrow said, change everything, and the other said death. And Julia wasn't derisively telling me to get over it. She was telling me that if I was to survive, I'd need to get over myself and live for what matters most. When I came back to shore, I realized that it was Father's Day. This is her gift to me, the gift that would save my life. And it did.
And it did. From this event, came your journey and your research into the idea of purpose. So if you could talk a little bit about what purpose is and how purposefulness is tied in with happiness.
Sure. So purpose, as it's defined by psychologists and behavioral scientists, is a self-organizing life aim. I'll explain that. What purpose does is help you organize the goals of your life. Imagine how many goals we might have in our life, little and big. I have a goal of lifting this glass of water and, drinking some of it. Maybe there are big goals too, but having a purpose and direction in our lives helps organize not only what we're going to aspire to do, but also the things that we're going to ignore. So, for example, social media. Do I really care, or should I care what Kim Kardashian is wearing today or what she cares about? She may be a very nice person, but frankly, I don't care. And what she's wearing or how she thinks. I mean, that's not an interesting person to me. And it's not, that's not a person who I'm going to try to live my life around or emulate. Now, if Kim Kardashian is a person to emulate, then she may be part of your purpose, because she may be one of your goals. But for me, that's not. And there's so many things now that we're exposed to every single day that we could direct ourselves toward, and it would, or could conflict with things that really do matter most. What a purpose does is help reorganize around the things. It reorganizes our energy, the most valuable thing that we have, around the things that matter most. And when we are purposeful, it's not just having a purpose, but it's bringing your best self to your purpose every day. You become happy. And, I was interviewed by Martha Stewart magazine a couple of years ago for their holiday issue. And, this woman was writing an article about happiness and how to be happy. And so she said, well, you're a behavioral scientist. Tell us how to be happy. I said, wrong question. I said, the more you simply pursue happiness, the less happy you are, quite honestly. And that's been shown. Having a transcending purpose that transcends your own ego, that transcends your own self-enhancing goals, that looks toward your community, toward your neighbors, to loved ones, to causes you care about, important missions that you have in your life. And then bringing your best self to that has been shown time and time again to make us deeply happy, deeply satisfied with our lives.
So happiness is the thing that comes out of it.
The side effect. It's a side effect. I mean, if you just strive toward happiness, it doesn't seem to work, does it?
No, it's elusive. It's entirely elusive, I would think. Many people have written about the fundamental importance of knowing one's purpose and of purposeful living. So tell me, how does your work build on that or differ from the body of existing work?
Yeah, well, writing about purpose and the concept of that goes back 2,400 years to Aristotle. I mean, Aristotle's mentor was Plato, and Plato's mentor was Socrates. And Socrates, this street philosopher, said the unexamined life is not worth living. But then Aristotle said, yeah, Socrates is right about that, but the purposeless life isn't worth examining in the first place. And I'm paraphrasing Aristotle, but essentially he was getting after this notion that life is kind of a two-sided coin. There's this idea and importance of examining your life and being your own researcher of your life. But the other side is having a life that has purpose. And so both of them together, when you're continually examining and trying to improve and trying to grow, trying to learn, and at the same time, building a purpose and direction through that, that's a really positive experience. But then you can take this through so many other philosophers, and you can go right up to existential philosophers, where Jean-Paul Sartre said, we know everything now except how to live. And he talked about projects. We need projects or a purpose in our lives. His partner for life, Simone de Beauvoir, said, as we grow older, we need to build stronger purpose in our lives, so we're not just some kind of pathetic, ironic shadow of what we used to be. We have to repurpose our lives. So these people talked about that in the early 1900s. And then in the middle 1900s, of course, Viktor Frankl, a physician, was a Jewish physician, put into 3 different concentration camps, lost his whole family through the Nazis. And he wrote this famous book called Man's Search for Meaning, because he was the concentration camp physician during these times. So he survived, but he also was a researcher by nature. And so he started asking, like, why do some people survive and some not, if they're not murdered outright? And he found that the people with stronger purpose and direction in their lives were more likely to survive the camps, and also afterwards too. People could grow from these horrific experiences if they could repurpose their lives. So that was all observational, but through very powerful observation. And since then, he wrote over a dozen books. But now there's a lot of research that looks at things like neuroscience, or what's called epigenetics. We have just recently published a study showing that people with a strong purpose have longer epigenetic or biological clocks. They're actually, their physiology is stronger, and we can predict longer lives in these people when they have stronger purpose in their lives. And you can control statistically for age and race and education and income and health status and everything possible, the kitchen sink. You can't get rid of this effect. People with stronger purpose live longer, and they have longer biological clocks. I could go on, but even there's a part of our brain called the ventral medial prefrontal cortex. There will be no tests, don't worry. But this part of the brain right here, we have more of this as humans than any other animal, actually, by weight. And this prefrontal cortex, this part, the ventral part, the part right in the front here, it relates to ourself. When we ask people what their core values are, what matters most to you, what's your purpose, this part gets very active. And this part relates to future orientation. So as I'm thinking about my purpose, I'm thinking about the future. That's probably a reason why people with strong purpose 10 years later, controlling for their net income and net worth at time 1, 10 years later, are making more money than people with a weaker purpose. It's why people are much healthier. It's why people, if they're scared or exposed to some sort of really shocking situation, they are at first shocked just like anyone else, but then recover much faster. So they're much more resilient, and they're able to control their emotions much better, far less likely to develop depression. But just for example, if you ask whether there are side effects of having a purpose, boy, people with strong purpose have more friends and they have better sex.
I know you brought that up several times in the book, and if that doesn't sell people on the idea, what else?
Yeah. No, this is a study of women asking, middle-aged women asking about, they assessed their purpose and they found they had higher quality sex, for example. So there are a lot of things that are associated with having a stronger purpose that we can now study using the most modern science. And this is just over the last 10 years, this has just started to emerge more and more. This is equivalent of not smoking and working out and having a good diet. It's really important, but also having a strong purpose actually motivates a stronger, better diet and more physical activity.
This is a great segue into the whole part of your story where you confronted your disdain for the philosophers and then began to reevaluate how you regarded them. Philosophy is one of those things that doesn't subject itself to the scientific method very well. So talk about how you went from being closed-minded about philosophy to finding it helpful for this particular project.
It's funny. Stephen Hawking was quoted as saying philosophy is dead, and as a scientist, before these things happened to my daughter, before she passed away, I would have put myself in that camp. Like, why are philosophers even there anymore? We have science, and philosophers have led us astray for millennia, many millennia. And, why should we listen to them or other people saying things without any empirical evidence? They just make stuff up. And, they use quote methods, but, they're not the kind of empirical methods we may use as scientists. So I get that. At the same time, every scientist has to start with a question. And it's the questions that are really in the realm of philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think philosophers are amazing at asking the right questions. Like Jean-Paul Sartre said, we know everything now except how to live. So how should we live our lives now? What makes us happy? Which was Aristotle's question, actually. It was what makes us happy. And he said, having a strong purpose and direction. And so those questions can be answered or can be asked by 2,400-year-old philosophers, and they can be answered by us. And they can be answered by us scientifically. And we now know a lot more than we ever did. And Aristotle did not use scientific method. So I'm not sure he could have answered that question adequately, but I think we can now.
What you're saying makes me think about how to use an overused adage, it takes a village. One person doesn't have the answer to all the questions.
It's a village of thinkers, yeah. And, scientists very often, I think, ask the wrong questions and should be asking, some questions like, how do we live? As opposed, just for an example, a lot of medical researchers ask the question, how do I live longer? And I might ask, and a philosopher might ask, how do I live better?
Mm-hmm.
Because, the difference between, as Seneca, an ancient philosopher in Rome, asked, he said, it doesn't, if you live 120 years versus living 100 years versus 70 years in the bigger picture, that's nothing. Mm-hmm. Especially if you're living a life that is slavishly adhering to other people's expectations.
Mm-hmm.
If you're just a wallflower in life, those are things that ancient philosophers talked about a lot, and they were right.
Well, purpose and purposefulness is on the quantity or quality end of the quality versus quantity equation, I would think.
Yeah, you're so right. Yeah, you've got it.
Does purpose become static, or is one's purpose fluid? Can it be changed? Can it evolve?
Yeah, a couple things about purpose. And, I'd love to get into how we find a purpose, but our purposes I view as the concentric rings in a tree. If I'm young, and I love teaching undergraduate students at the University of Michigan, because I think they're still in that early phase of their life where if they become purposeful now or understand how to become purposeful, those methods of becoming purposeful, then the core of their tree is really strong. So when bad things happen to them, the core is strong. And from that, you start building new purposes. You might graduate from college or high school. You might get married. New purpose maybe. You might decide or not to have children. New purpose. Depending on what directions you take, you might get a new job, new purpose. You might get a divorce. You might lose a loved one. You might get sick. You might retire. You might die. all of these times and are processes where you may need to repurpose your life. And they're important periods. I'd say anytime you need a Hallmark card. What do you think, Sarah?
That's one signal.
Yeah, it is. Well, those are all their life events. And,
Yeah.
when you get a Hallmark card, so sorry about your loss, or so sorry you're sick, hope you get better. Oh, congratulations, on that new job, or, oh, sorry about losing your job. All those times are to there's a great times to rethink, re-examine what matters most in your life. And that's the beginning of finding a purpose. I think asking this question, what matters most? When I came back to the shore after deciding I was going to live, in my kayak, I was out about 2 miles. So it was really far away and really dumb being so early in the morning and, still dark. The sun was just coming up. First of all, understanding that you have choice. Like 2 miles out, I had this revelation that I can choose to die if I want to, as well as I can choose to live if I want to. No one is putting a gun to my head. You have to live or you have to die. Mm-hmm. I can choose either way. And it was somehow that feeling of autonomy, of agency, that I could do either one. And then that almost gave me strength and energy and vitality to go, yeah, why not try? Go back, and then you're a behavioral scientist. Figure out looking down. And by the way, this turns out to be a wonderful coping strategy. If you're having a hard time, put yourself in this third person looking down on you, mm-hmm. going, Vic, you're in deep shit right now. You need some help, or you're going to die. You have to fix yourself. And you might go, well, how am I going to fix myself? Well, here's an idea. Let's pull out a piece of paper and write down the things that matter most to you, which I did. Literally just coming back, dripping wet in the kayak early in the morning. I wrote down my family, the people, the names in my family. I wrote down my students. I wrote down a number of things. I still wanted to have fun. I lost my daughter. I was feeling as depressed as I ever had in my life. And I thought, do I really want to go around moping all the time and, wearing black or whatever you might do? Mm-hmm. I'd certainly heard and knew of people who had lost loved ones and ended their own lives after, who lose their children. It's mm-hmm. difficult. Aristotle, in fact, said it's the hardest thing to have happen in your life, to lose a child. So, but understanding that, but then understanding I had a choice, that I could still have fun, I could still be happy, I could mm-hmm. still be productive, I could still do these things, and I'm going to write down the things where I'm directing my energy. That's step one in finding purpose. What matters most? And if people go, well, I don't know what matters most, what's on your smartphone? It's like, for me, that's my granddaughter, Madeline Julia. And that's our dog, Uncle Lenny, of course. And crazy dog. But, so what's on your smartphone? You just ask that simple question. Maybe it's a work of nature. Maybe you mm-hmm. care a lot about nature. Maybe it's a quote from somebody. Maybe it's your spouse. Maybe it's some other family member or a friend or a cause that you care about. Whatever. Maybe start with what's on your smartphone. And if it's the factory settings, then start again.
Yes, well put. I loved the graphic novel you created. The graphic novel came about in 2013, and then came Life on Purpose, the hardcover book, which is really a great primer for learning how to find purpose. I love the graphic novel for so many reasons. It's funny, it's smart, it's didactic in the best way. But talk a little bit about how a graphic novel, what can that do that the hardcover book
Yeah.
couldn't? Or what's the
It came
difference?
out first because it was a trauma narrative. You know, when something like this happens to anybody, and this, by the way, I'm not anything special in this sense. Many people have lost loved ones and that are close, but also other people have gone through war. People are right now in the Middle East going through horrific times. They will go through this. These people who have gone through these horrific times will in some way have to get this poison out of them. You know, it's almost like a poison, and it has to get out. Or a baby, I don't know what the right metaphor is, but it has to leave your system. And that trauma narrative, for me, was the graphic novel. And I found myself in New York City. This is a true story. I was just walking down along Madison Avenue. I was giving a talk, I think, somewhere. And I looked up, and because I kept thinking, how do I get this out of me? I don't know. You know, I really don't. And then I looked up and I saw a sign for DC Comics. And so as the building is a huge skyscraper, DC Comics. And I just looked at my phone and I looked up DC Comics. I called, looked literally staring up at the building and said, you know, DC Comics, hi, can I talk to your creative director? I said, oh, yeah, David. I said, yeah, David, of course. I'd like to talk to him. And so let me see if he's around. And I'm thinking, whoa, that's amazing. David gets on the phone and he says, hi, how are you? And I explained a little bit about, you know, a story that I wanted to get out. And he said, well, look, do you like wine? And I said, do fish swim? He said, well, there's a really good wine bar down the street. How about if you meet me on the Batman floor? The Batman floor? He said, how about if you meet me around 4:30 or so? This is totally true. I just pop in, I go up to the second floor, the Batman floor. There's the Batmobile. There's all these still, you know, artists working on comics. And he gave me a little tour. It turns out he was the one who translated the comics into movies. It was incredible. So we go and I, you know, buy him a really nice bottle of wine, which turns out to be the least expensive consulting that I've ever paid for, consultation I've ever paid for. And it's a really good bottle of wine, still not even close to what I normally spend in you know, some sort of consultation. And he just said, well, here's how to do it. You know, you need, for your story, you need at least 3 artists. And I won't get into detail. It's just that, like, I wanted like dream sequences. I wanted, you know, the past. I wanted something with me teaching, as you said, write what you know. And so I was a teacher, and I had these ideas. And he said, but there is one artist who you could get. He's Cajun, and he's tough to get. He's tough to find because he's very, very independent. But he lives in Lafayette, Louisiana, and so I just looked him up, took like 12 phone calls and emails. He never returned anything. Finally, I reach him, and he said, yeah, do you want to come to Lafayette? I said, yeah, when? I don't know, this weekend. I flew to Lafayette, Louisiana, picks me up in this enormous old Cadillac car, just super old though. And get in, he says, do you like boudin sausage? I said, do fish swim? I'd never had it. So anyway, we go out, and then we spent a couple of days together, literally, as he just drew and drew and drew. Said, because this guy from DC Comics said he can do everything. He's always in Comic-Con. He's like people's hero. And so together, it literally took us years. It took us 3 years after Julia passed away. I thought it would be a neat thing to do. It took a long time to put that together, and it was a labor of love. And I wanted it to get to your question, I wanted something that would reach people in all walks of life. I'm very proud and grateful to say that my graphic novel has been used at Stanford Business School, but it's also has been used on death row in Huntsville, Texas, at the Texas State Prison System. In fact, I still send boxes of my book because they have like actually like a philosophy circle, and they talk about purpose, and it's very powerful what they do. So it's been used in such a variety of places, and I'm just super grateful for that.
The hardcover book, Life on Purpose, is also written in a very accessible tone. Nice. There's a fair amount of science in it, but even for people like myself with a liberal arts degree, it's entirely comprehensible. The graphic novel benefits from all the extraordinary visuals.
Yeah.
And
it's fun. I'm a very visual person, and it was so much fun to think about all these experiences I went through visually, and then have an artist who didn't just look at you straight on, but may have looked at me from the ceiling or from the ground level, from different angles. And that's what really good comic book artists do. And then also how he would connect one page, getting your eye to flow to the next page. It's really hard to do. And there's, those bubbles with all the text in it. That's a separate artist. And that guy lived up in the North Pole. I kid you not. He lives in the North Pole, Alaska. And his name is Kel. And I've never seen him in person, but he is one wild dude. I know that for sure. And he's like a letterer. They call it a letter. And that's what he does. Can you imagine? What an amazing group of people who are all connected around the comics.
There's so much to talk about.
Sorry, I know.
No. I find the subject endlessly fascinating because it gets at the core of being human. But let's end by having you talk about your own purpose, which you talk about in your books. You began with the paddling of your kayak, which is a really good metaphor for trying to paddle through life, but you're devoid of purpose. And then you return to the kayak at the end of your book in the last chapter. So you found your rudder, and your rudder is what?
Yeah. Well, my rudder really is my purpose. It is my direction. And so Seneca once said, it doesn't matter how much wind is in your sails if you don't have a harbor. And so you really need a harbor or a purpose. My rudder might be my core values. There are a lot of different things you could attribute to different parts of a boat, but I love the boat analogy because I do think that, or kayak analogy, whatever, I do think you need a direction, a harbor to aim toward. Because I know a lot of people who have a lot of wind in their sails, but no harbor. They're these, hey, let's do this, but they're not doing anything. They're not, they don't have a direction. A lot of my students are that way. They don't have direction. They have tons of vitality, but they're willing to they'll paddle for you, they'll go anywhere if they find a cause that they believe in. So finding a cause, thinking about what matters most and setting a goal or goals to that. As an example, I wrote down, when I came back from Lake Michigan, sat down at the kitchen table, wrote down what mattered most. And one of the things that mattered most were my students. And so right away, I decided I'm going to call the university because they had let me off for the next semester. They said, you just lost your daughter. I mean, that's horrible. And you don't have to teach now or maybe another semester if you need it. Just take what you need, which is really, really kind. And not everybody gets that, for one thing. It's so amazing. But then I thought, wow, I called the university and said, as nice as that is, it's the worst advice that I could get. I need to teach right now. And I'm going to teach every student as if they're my daughter, Julia. And so with that, it just engaged me right away. And I needed to be engaged. I needed to have that as a purpose. And then I started saying, wow, I have 200 students, so I better work out more. So I need to have energy. so I started studying what gives you more energy. And I came up with this moniker of space, sleep, presence, or mindfulness, basically being present here and now, activity, physical activity, creativity. Turns out that people randomize into one group where they're really creative. Hey, write this haiku, or even listen to this jazz, outfit. Compared to some control condition, those people who've just written the haiku have a lot more energy. So creativity and eating well. And so part of my book, in fact, the last, I don't know, third or so or more of my book, Life on Purpose, is about those 5 things: sleep, presence, activity, creativity, and eating, or giving yourself space. And then being your own researcher, like finding out what gives you the most energy, because it could be for you being creative. For me, maybe it's being present, or maybe eating well. For different people, you'll just become your own researcher. Figure out what gives you the most energy and vitality, and how you can bring your best self every day toward your purpose, which makes you happy.
Vic, thank you for your time and for your ability, your gift for having been able to translate this complexity in your life in a way that's accessible and universal. So the question that always follows, if one wants to learn more about your work and the books that came of it, how does one do that?
Well, I think it's easy to get my books on Amazon. If you want, there are bookstores that some of them carry this. There's a big Canadian bookstore chain, if you happen to be in Canada, Indigo Books, and they turn this into the book of the month. And Heather Reisman, who's the founder of Indigo Books, which is kind of like, Barnes and Noble, she made it one of Heather's picks. So in any Indigo bookstore, you can pick this up, which is fine. There's actually a new documentary I'm going to recommend too. I was science advisor on a brand new documentary coming out of the AARP, called The Hidden Power of Purpose. And that's going to be out on Apple TV in November. And it's just making its way through the film festival circuit right now. It's doing very well. I just got back from Indianapolis at the Heartland Film Festival. Tomorrow I'm going to the, what is it? It's the Hot Springs Film Festival in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And Newport Film Festival in California will show this too. So I've been running around with the director answering questions, but that's The Hidden Power of Purpose. It's really cool. It includes a person who I've gotten to know a little bit, Mark Barden, who created the Sandy Hook Promise. His son was murdered at Sandy Hook Elementary School, and he took his grief and created the Sandy Hook Promise, and they have saved so many lives, and their advocacy has been so powerful, even in the face of idiots, the Alex Joneses of the world, who literally that very day said, "Oh, you guys are lying about it."
Right.
I mean, can you imagine losing a loved one, and then literally that very day, people saying you're a liar? I mean, that's just it. I don't know. I don't even know how to describe the idiocy of that and how evil that is. It's almost, to me, definition of evil. And so he faces all of that. And but with this purpose, he doesn't let this stuff perturb him, and that's what's key. It's like, I'm really focused. It's like you're swimming underwater and you're going to go, I'm going to touch that other side. And even after more and more pain in your lungs, et cetera, you swim further. You may not even touch that other side, but it's an aspiration and it keeps you going. And that's what purpose does.
Thanks, Vic. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I want to thank everyone for watching. The Arts Center's exhibition, Happy, continues in the GAAC's main gallery through March 21. So thanks again, and see you next time.